there must be de-escalations towards a nationwide ceasefire, as well as efforts to address tensions between military factions. The second challenge is the sheer scale of needs. Syria's economy has been ravaged by this dreadful conflict, its infrastructure destroyed, 90% of Syrians living in poverty. Let me just stress that these are enormous challenges that will require all of our support in the manner that will have to go beyond the humanitarian in terms of economic development, reconstruction, and the process to address and ultimately end sanctions. And of course, Madam President, the third challenge is of course political. The Syrian people have sacrificed so much so that they can determine their own future and realize their legitimate aspirations. We must ensure that the political process remains on track. Otherwise, I fear new instability. Madam President, before traveling to Damascus, I joined representatives of the Arab Contact Group on Syria, along with ministers and representatives of Bahrain, France, Germany, Qatar, Turkey, the UAE, the UK, US, and the European Union. This meeting expressed a common belief that the transitional political process must be Syrian-led and Syrian-owned and produce an inclusive, non-sectarian and representative government formed through a transparent process based on the principles of Security Council Resolution 2254. The Aqaba statement emphasized support for my mandate. In addition, Madam President, I think there is broad understanding that Resolution 2254 cannot, in the new circumstances, be applied mechanically. But the core principles have wide Syrian consensus. And while Resolution 2254 identified two parties, one of whom has been toppled and cannot feature in the process, it is still the case that the political transition is needed and that this will require an inclusive intra-Syrian process. Madam President, what can this look like? First, Syrians need an orderly transition that provides for preservation of state institutions that serve their interests and provide them with critical services. Here, let me take note of the efforts to ensure this already, in terms of safeguarding ministers of the former government to transfer power and calling on state employees to continue their work. This provides a strong first basis, but it is not in itself enough. Second, the transition must also be credible and inclusive, including the broader spectrum of Syrian society and Syrian parties, so that it inspires public confidence. And here let me emphasize that this is the clear desire expressed by Syrians themselves. Just as we saw significant military coordination between many groups in the recent operations, now, as we are moving forward and into a full political phase, this should be matched by inclusive political engagement. Third, there must be a new constitution in line with Resolution 2254. Fourth, there must be free and fair elections inclusive of all Syrians, as Resolution 2254 envisages, in accordance with international standards. And Madam President, here let me say, I fully appreciate the need to ensure quick service delivery and law and order. Stability is fundamental. Competence is key too. But none of this is incompatible with a credible and inclusive political transition. it is precisely such an approach that can enable stability and indeed prevent new conflict. Madam President, I have discussed all of these elements in depth in Damascus. I met with the commander of the new administration, Mr. Ahmed al-Shara, and Prime Minister of the caretaker authorities, Mr. Mohammed al-Bashir. I also met here in Damascus with representatives of the Syrian Negotiations Commission, including armed group representatives that remain in contact with the leader, Badr Jamous. I also met with Syrian civil society and women. It was heartening to see so many of them, for years speaking across front lines, now together in their capital here in Damascus. They continue to be at the forefront of the emergency response and relief to all Syrians. Their inclusive participation is a cornerstone to sustainable peace. Madam President, concrete movement on an inclusive political transition will be key in ensuring Syria receives the economic support it needs